So welcome everybody to another Tuesday class. I thought it was worth going over this slide again. By the way, Larissa is not with us because she's got some work to do on schedule. And Nico is busy, I think, dealing with the flood, so, and house foreign guests. So of course, we record this. And I thought this slide, especially since Nat, you particularly appreciate it, was worth going over one more time. Our tribalism, we are the most tribal animal on earth. There are other tribal animals, in fact, most are. Bees are tribal, ants are tribal, but we're tribal in every kind of way, every context, everything. And there's a line of thought that this was essential to our evolution and us annihilating the Neanderthals who we co-occupied the earth with, even though they're stronger, bigger, and smarter. Our social tribalism gave us a competitive advantage. And so that's what we deal with today. And social context fields generated by our fields powerfully affect behaviors of everybody. And I like to go back to the most fundamental ideas when I can. And I think this comes from our two deepest needs, both emotional, to feel valued or actually loved, and to feel included. And social context cause failures when people ignore them and when they're inappropriate. The obedience to authority's unfounded optimism is disastrous. And it accounts for the Fukushima Daiichi explosion, the Challenger disaster, and the Max. These are all cases where senior people told people something that was not reality, and they gave into it for the sake of whatever. And the other one is to avoid being criticized. And this comes into play when we're talking about not just casual criticism, like we might have a criticism of a play, but toxic, relentless criticism, which is what the Hubble contractor got because they kept slipping schedule and breaking the budget. I think the thing overran by a factor of 5 before we were done. And that's really painful for the people who have to manage them and find the money. And then the Tokyo train disaster, where the guy wanted to avoid what they called rehabilitation, which meant things like scrubbing tracks with a toothbrush for 3 months. So, and then the third, inappropriate deference to authority. And this occurs when you have too much of an authority span. Now, this is the proximate cause of the worst tragedy in aircraft history, Tenerife Island, and the 4 years of crashing Korean Airlines. So what's most fascinating about this is that I don't know anybody else that does this work and looks at it this way. And the fact is that if you understand this and know what you're doing, you can avoid this. So thoughts or comments?
I think we may have lost Darinka.
See that, yep.
No, I'll just reiterate, I really appreciate and enjoy this summary. We've seen this before, obviously, like all this stuff we've seen before, but it didn't register quite like it did last week.
There's a lot of content here, and so it takes time to sink in. And I think repetition is the essence of learning. So I think if you saw it again in 3 months, you might say, yeah, okay. So
find something new, yeah.
I think that's the most interesting characteristic about this whole system is at one level it's incredibly simple, at another level it's deep and complex.
Yeah, I would agree.
I used to really like when the Chinese audience would ask me penetrating questions in the workshops because I could show off my depth of knowledge about this.
Right.
So you guys have workbooks from before, and I don't think we're going to do the exercises. The book has 2 different formats in it, a landscape format for the context shifting worksheet, so you can fit it on 1 page, and most of the rest in portrait style. And I ask people to write down in the workbook things that matter to what you care about with your character. what guiding you to do the right thing. So a friend of mine at CU once said there's only two things leaders need: character and competence. And I think that may be right. So how do you do caring, empathetic, include other people, face unfortunate realities? And then what are you competent about in yourself, like hobbies or things, interpersonal competencies, technical competencies, hobbies, knowledge? So I have people fill this out and share it in these huddles. So for many years, I used to work with a group at large, and I tried everything to get a sort of a uniformity of sharing, and nothing worked. I had little rewards if you shared. I had penalties if you didn't share. I tried all kinds of things. Then I had an epiphany. I had a occasion where I was doing a workshop in China, and because I don't understand anything in Mandarin, I thought it was useful to have facilitators to come and work with smaller groups. So we had, at that time, I broke people into like 6 or 8 person, 10-person groups with a facilitator, and had them stand, and the facilitator helped them guide the thing. And I walked around the room on the first day with my translator and realized the facilitators were teaching their material, and it couldn't be dealt with. So I said, send them all home. I don't want them anymore. And by the way, they came gratis, so it wasn't a big deal. I think they stayed. But then I said, what's a group size that would probably work? The people can do this themselves. I thought 2 is not enough. 3, you tend to have 2-person ganging up on the third. So 4 is the right minimum number. So I put in groups of 4 and had them do the exercises, and it was a miracle. Everybody spoke, everybody participated. In small groups, you couldn't hide. And by standing and facing each other, you get the benefit of eye contact, which excites important neurological responses in people. And they would read what they wrote in their workbook. And anyone that starts telling a lengthy story, you should red card them. And you can verbally red card, just say red card. And then when each person finishes, encourage them with a little appreciation. And there's another benefit to this. When it's in a foreign language like Mandarin, I can see the progress of the groups by how the applause is going. I can watch them and notice this. And then when everybody finishes, you return to your seats. So the groups would start sitting down. This worked really well because the people who are still standing would see other people are sitting down and wrap up. This was quite optimum. This is kind of an exercise that I put in early for 2 reasons. One is that they've been by now they've been listening for an hour and a half, and I think it's tedious to just listen. And I want them on their feet, and I want them to talk to each other. And the second is they're going to stay in these groups for the whole workshop, and they're going to do an appreciation exercise. They don't know each other. This is a way to get the people to know each other to the extent they can do an authentic appreciation exercise. So I consider this one of the main breakthroughs in organizing the thing. I call them huddles because at the time I was working with technical teams that were in groups. That's a common organization thing, so I couldn't call them groups. Team was the word for the bigger thing, so I picked up this word huddle, which of course has been co-opted in American football and probably in rugby too. Comments or thoughts about this? Okay.
I think it's a very extremely useful information for any discussion this about 2 people, 3 people, 4 people groups. Thank you. That's such a good tip.
Yeah, it works unbelievably well. And by the way, they did this work with high energy. This particular format with them writing first and then talking about what they wrote. Let's talk a little about that. I think creativity flourishes in structure. So there was an experiment back at the university when I was there where they took engineering students and gave them an egg and some cotton and some glue and some tape and said, do something creative. And they sat there, didn't do anything. And they said, see if you can find a way to drop the egg off the roof of the building onto the concrete and not have it break. Everybody got to work. So I think structure is essential. So I give them that structure, some ideas. I'm planting the idea of the importance of character, giving them a page to fill out. That probably takes about 10 minutes. And then putting them in their groups of 4 and monitoring. With a small group in English, I can kind of walk around and see where things are. But the applause gives me a great meter for how things are going. And also the groups notice this. So if other groups are applauding, they haven't finished yet, they'll kind of pick up the pace, because synchronizes everything. It's quite an interesting, it took me, I don't know, 10 years to figure this out. So I'm kind of slow, what can I say? Anyway, a deeper look into social context. This is a page from Diane Vaughan's book that I read long after Challenger. I read this book when I was at CU. I think somebody recommended it to me. I've forgotten now. But this sentence really spoke to me. It is unfortunate that the sociological explanation is the correct one. These invisible forces elude remedy. I showed you this before and I had unacknowledged. I've removed that because now we've acknowledged them. But the idea of invisible forces that elude remedy is just a fantastic notion, I think. So we'd like to measure and manage these forces, these invisible forces. What occupation specializes in doing this? Well, the answer is physicists. That's what we do. We're invisible force field experts. That's our entire game. And there are 4 natural forces. I'm sure you're very familiar with some of these. Gravity is very, very weak, but unique in that it has this infinite range. So it's controlling the whole universe. Electromagnetic forces, you are familiar with these because the light switches and light bulbs and magnets. But actually, these are the forces that give material structure. So this table is holding together because of small electromagnetic imbalances that are, if you push on the table, you push things closer together, the similar charges repel. So it actually is the force that gives matter strength and sort of everything about it. These other 2 forces are probably only of interest to physicists. The strong force, and it's incredibly strong, is the force that holds nuclei together. And this is the force that you release when you make a nuclear explosion or nuclear weapon. And the weak force, which is very, very weak, it is involved in radioactive decay. That's it. That's all nature has. That's the entirety of nature as far as physicists know. So I started calling the social context force the 5th force, or if you prefer a field, the terms are more or less interchangeable in physics. And so I'm at CU as a professor and in the management department, and somebody walked in my office and sat down and said, "Charlie, what makes you think you can contribute to leadership?" Which is what I started with, an area so many of us have spent our whole life studying. So I reflected on that. I took that as a fair question. And I said, well, there's 2 things. The first is that I've had a job in the real world, actually a pretty big job, and done it really well. And none of you have worked in any real long capacity in any business or even any outside job. The second is I'm a physicist, so I think differently than you do. I go to first principles thinking, which is a habit of physicists and not common. Most people, in contrast, reason by analogy. I can talk more about that. I've talked about it on and off from time to time. But that's 2 fundamentally different ways of approaching things. So I was thinking back to my undergraduate physics days, and we used to joke with each other, the right coordinate system turns an impossible problem into 2 really hard ones. So that stuck with me. That was we said that sort of humorously to each other, walking around undergraduates with our physics classes, but there's a lot of truth to it. So I began to think that the way to get a handle on this is to develop an equation or a coordinate system to organize the ideas underlying leadership. And at the time, I labored under a terrible misconception. I thought business books were useful. And I'm reading them and I feel like I'm doing something useful. But it wasn't until later it occurred to me, I never did anything differently because of these books. And if you don't create behavioral change, I submit you haven't done anything useful. And you're familiar with these. They're about Bill Gates or Andy Grove, founder of Intel, or Jack Welch, who turned out to be a jerk in the end. Anyway, at the time, and these books are all the same. They have stories about these people that are entertaining and probably mostly true. Then there's lists of what you're supposed to do. There's the 7 habits, the 4 things, the 6 things. And so I thought there must be some, if these people are smart and successful, there must be some common organizing principle that I can find. So I took these lists and I put them on this flip sheets and taped them on the wall in my office back at the university and began using coordinate systems to try and find something that would unify these. I was looking for some physicists hate lists. We like equations and things that organize. So I worked on this for about 2 months, trying everything, and nothing made any sense. And I'll tell you why later. It was a complete failure. The day that I gave up, I picked up the Daily Camera. That's when we used to get paper newspapers. And there was a Dilbert cartoon. And he said, every consultant makes his living with a 2x2 matrix. I reflected on that and said, yeah, I think that's true. Most people I know that work as consultants have some little 2x2 matrix. And this is this is Cartesian coordinates named for the French mathematician Rene Descartes, who unfortunately created this whole idea of a simplicity, the way to understand anything rather than the system thinking, which pervades everything to this day. Anyway, so at the time I was reading Jung's work on psychological types, what he called types, or psychological development. And he said something that really was profound. He said, we build our personalities on 2 processes for which we have a strong preference at birth: information and deciding. So I like this. This made sense to me, input and output. And I put this on a Cartesian coordinate system because of the Dilbert cartoon, and I knew what the labels were. I knew there's 2 kinds of information. There's intuitive information, and I best understand that through a book by a guy named Klein, who talked about an example of firemen in a building, and there were about half a dozen of them, and 2 were older, more experienced firemen, and the roof's on fire. They're going in there to shoot a hose up to the roof, and the 2 experienced guys said, "Get out of here now." And the younger guys said, "What for? We got to shoot this fire." They said, "Move now." And they ran out and the floor collapsed. So something in their past experience, being highly experienced with this, they saw whiffs of smoke or something that other people didn't notice because they're focused on the ceiling, and realized they were in real danger. So that's my explanation of intuition. And I think that's works for me. I'm an overdone intuitor almost to a fault. Another example of this was I had I would pull my staff together. We had a short staff meeting every morning, and it'd be some complex thing. And I'd say, here's what we got to do. And my deputy, who was another physicist, a guy I was very fond of, said, "Charlie, I don't know how what's the reason for that?" So I would stop and explain to him how I got there, and I'd go through a different process, which is a step-by-step logical reasoning. And when I got through with that, the answer would always be slightly different. The intuitive processor is very fast, but it's not very precise. And when I went through that process, I learned something, and then he said, "Oh, now I understand. We'll go do it." So that's the opposite. The sensor is just driven by data. That they take in data through their senses, primarily visual data, but audio data, smells, the whole thing. So that was pretty clean. And then deciding, I knew there's only 2 ways you can decide: with emotions or logic. I was already quite familiar with this. So I had the background to take and be comfortable putting this on this coordinate system and then using it to organize stuff. So the way Young talked about it was, he said that these create personality foundations. And when I started thinking about this, it was pretty obvious to me that if you prefer intuitive deciding with emotional information, that's about people. It's about empathy. It's about caring. And these were named quadrants, like cultivating, and I tried for 5 years to get people to use the word cultivating, and nobody would. They called it upper left quadrant, lower right quadrant. I didn't even like the word quadrant. So one day I said, why don't I just color them? So I colored them and made this green, and that stuck. Everybody loved this green. And the green color is picked because appreciating people and being empathetic grows people. So it's the idea of growing like you're growing plants. Comments or thoughts? Everybody got this idea? Makes sense? Okay. When you're in the realm of the emotional and the sense, and by the way, I demonstrate this in workshops. I'll walk down to someone and shake their hand and say, thank you for being here. I get a big smile. I have a big smile. So I showed them that in that moment, this positive relationship is having a big emotional impact, and we're all experiencing it and sensing it. So this is about relationship. I named this including because I knew this is the most important relational need, to feel included. And I colored these yellow because I had better uses for the other primary colors. You could think about this the way that a yellow flower attracts a bumblebee or something. It's about relationship. So when I work with these people, it's always fascinating that they're very relational, that they get along with everybody likes them. And their big problem is that they go too far. I've got a friend of mine now who's taken one of his childhood buddies and made him a home in his house. And the guy is 65 years old, unemployed. And I'm going to talk to him tomorrow about, you got to do something about this, because he's now dependent on you. And if you're not willing to support him as family, i.e. pay his bills, you do him a favor to move him out and quit enabling this. So that's their Achilles heel. The intuitive decider with logical information, that's me. And I don't enjoy anything quite as much as a new idea and thinking. So thinking's fun. I colored this blue sky, blue for blue sky thinking. This is where Bill Gates lives, and Elon Musk and so forth, Steve Jobs. These people almost always characterized by big difficulties with relationships. Steve Jobs had a daughter, didn't speak to him for 10 years, couldn't get along with his neighbors. Trump lives here as well. He's in this spot and can't get along with anybody. Bill Gates, I think, does better. And so what you got to do is you got to reach out here. And I had to learn this the hard way, to come over here and fill this out, even though it's not comfortable when you start, to be effective with what you are, where your home is. Then finally, the logical and sense, this is process people. They're interested in certainty of result. They're systematic. I colored this orange because well, when I go to China, they'd say, well, why aren't you using red? And I said, well, red's not a good color in the West. We think of stoplights and fire. So you can think of orange like our orange sun organizes the solar system. And I told them, well, I'll get to that story later, I think. Yeah, I'll talk about that later. Okay, so well, let me finish this up. I think it's here. So I was doing the workshop in China, and someone always asked this question. And so I said, I want you to know that I harness the power of red in a very interesting way. My wife understands this. So when I do workshops, I wear red underpants, and answered the question on the first day. Next morning, I'm up there, we start the workshop with my translator. She said, there's an enormous number of people that want to see your red underpants. So I thought, really? So I thought, okay. So I turned sideways and I pulled my pants down, showed my red underpants. what I forgot that I'm in China where there's 300 people in the room and every single one's recording this. So by evening, this thing they call WeChat, I was a celebrity in China for the American wearing red underpants. So you got to be careful of what you do. Comments or thoughts about this? This makes sense to you? You know, this is very handy. Junko and I use this in everyday life. You can, it's not a way to limit people or type them as much as it is a way to understand them and also be able to work with them. And so there's a expression, meet me where I live. I worked for we call it 1D blue. That means he's just blue, not much else. And I was the only person that could communicate with him effectively that I know. And the reason was when it was something that I wanted to do, for example, to help the NASA workforce, which he was anathema to, I'd come in here with a vision, an idea, and hook him into that. And once he's enjoying that, I'd take him into the other place. And this worked really well. So this is a great little communications device, et cetera, et cetera.
Actually, real quick, Charlie, I did have
Yes.
one comment.
Yes,
So
please.
I was introducing another mentor of mine to this idea, the quadrants and how all the pieces work. And I had gone to the colors.
Yeah.
A, probably too quickly, but also B, not recognizing at the time. I wasn't quite sure what color it is. I'm leaning towards him being an orange. And I think he would have actually connected to the cultivating, including visioning, directing versus the colors. So it's kind of an interesting, I'm curious to see when I get a chance to meet with him again and kind of take him through it again, trying to give him better hooks. Because he was like, Nat, you lost me.
I prefer using the nomenclature, but I couldn't get anybody to do it.
Yeah, I think he might be the type of person that would connect with that faster.
Yeah.
And then eventually the color is a nice shorthand, but yeah.
Well, it's actually, it's easier to remember, isn't it?
Yes.
On your feet? Okay. Okay. So I'm always, there's a process in physics called unification. And what that means is you like to get the ideas congruent around multiple ideas and models. For example, Einstein spent the latter part of his entire life trying to unify physics. What he meant by that was to make a single set of equations, or what we call a formalism, to include gravity, relativity, the whole thing, and never did it. So I'm always looking to somehow to make unification with other ideas. And I ask people, how many people are familiar with Maslow's needs hierarchy? Abraham Maslow, an American psychologist, and almost everybody is. It's a straightforward idea. So this is the updated hierarchy of Maslow's needs. The This is kind of whimsical, but also a lot of truth to it. When we had no utilities for 18 days when the flood hit here in 2013, the thing we missed most immediately was Wi-Fi. So we got in the car and drove to a coffee shop and sat down and checked email and news and that kind of thing. And I was showing this to some people, and I was in Frankfurt, showing it to people that come from, I think, I'm trying to think, Hungary, I think. And they said, no, Charlie, it's actually a deeper need. And I said, what is it? And they said, a charged battery. I thought, yep, okay, that's right too. And finally, most recently, I've got a deeper need, toilet paper in the COVID time. So the rule of threes, you need air on a time scale of 3 minutes. If you can't breathe, you're not gonna think about doing your job. You need water and sleep on a time scale of 3 days. And you need food on a time scale of 3 weeks. This is the rule of threes. And so the most basic needs are physiological: air, water, sleep, food. If those needs aren't met, you're not going to think about anything else till you get those needs met. Next one, I think, is the need to feel safe, an emotional need. And if you don't feel safe, you're in a state of a lot of problem. And the underlying thing to this is being with people that you find trustworthy. So trustworthiness is a really important need. And then I think the needs that I think most about, once those two needs are met, is the need to feel valued or loved. And for many years, I pushed the idea of making a 4D request, starting off with the request with appreciation. And that never goes wrong. I thought, isn't that great? That aligns with, by the way, the Maslow needs hierarchy is not precise. This is not exactly it, and nobody agrees about it precisely, but this is, I think, the essence of it. And then we all need to feel included, so you do something to make feel included. Then you address reality with 100% commitment. We all need realistic, optimistic futures. And then finally, you take action and you ask for what you want. So the core underlying piece of this is to choose to be accountable for what you do. So the 4D request, which I talked about for the first 10 years, linked it up with Maslow, is a very nice unification of ideas. And I'm often asked by people, particularly entrepreneurs in workshops, how do I motivate people? And I say, it's really pretty simple. You meet these needs. And Maslow said when these core needs are met, you go into a place he calls self-actualization. This is high motivation and performance. And if you don't meet any of these needs, you get collapse. So this is how simple this is. Interestingly, the needs that are most important are the need to feel appreciated. And people who don't feel appreciated have no energy, no commitment to anything, and need to feel included. And people who feel excluded act out the anger. The term we have in the vernacular is going postal. So let's pause a minute. Let's you guys think and comment on this work. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, actually, the thing I wrote down was the I'd forgotten about the base needs slide. So you need to be fed and have food and water, and then feel safe. I think that was kind of an interesting reminder, because if people aren't fed, don't feel safe, you don't even get to these four.
Yeah, that's right. Or how about breathe and water?
Yep.
Sleep.
Yep.
You know.
And then I think the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which probably many of us have, is just how much we're into drama states these days. And so, I think a lot of that, now connecting that to this slide, I think a lot of people don't feel included and don't feel appreciated. And so until we can fix some of those issues. We're gonna have a long way to go.
Yeah, and that's it. Simple, huh?
Simple but deep.
Yeah,
And it's also how when you talk about appropriately including people, how anything you do, let's say at work, it really can set you up for success or cause terrible problems if you fail on that front.
yep. You know, I mentioned before, this may seem kind of odd, but I had a 15-minute, I called it a micro staff meeting every morning with my direct reports. And so, and actually, if someone was new, I might invite them to sit in on it because they can sort of hear what's going on. And they go longer sometimes, but often 15 minutes, just get everybody kind of like, here's what's happening. It's, you know, if you're in Washington, DC, things change fast. So it was like where we're going today. And I think people loved coming to those meetings because 15 minutes, you got to hear the lay of the land. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the relationship between social contexts and behaviors. And we're going to leave the world of space shuttles and Hubble telescopes and 747s to some really simple things. Would you automatically and unconsciously modify your behaviors in each of these contexts? Giving or receiving a marriage proposal, having dinner with the fiance's family. If you said the wrong thing here in the US, you'd probably get a kick under the table. Or the bachelorette party, where for whatever reason people get drunk and whatever. Or hijacked on your honeymoon. And if you behaved inappropriately, would you be sanctioned? Yeah, I mentioned the kick under the table. If you behaved inappropriately with hijackers, they'd probably shoot you. Or the bachelorette party, they're gonna hound you to drink even if you don't like to. So if I had put some very simple probes on your body to measure, for example, movements of your limbs, I could probably tell which context you were in because you're gonna adapt to it. My point is that we adapt to these things. Let's pause for a minute and see if you buy this idea. We change our behaviors according to what's happening in the context.
Definitely.
Okay. That's the kick under the table thing. When getting shot. So, how would you observe invisible magnetic fields? Often I take a bar, imaginary bar, and hand it to someone in the audience, say, would you hold this thing? It's really heavy, and they hold it. And I ask them, just using your hands, can you tell me if it's magnetized? And if they answer truthfully, they say, no, I can't tell, and they can't. In principle, you could measure a very weak force from Earth's magnetic field, but none of us have that kind of sensitivity with a heavy bar. So I said, that's right, you can't, but I want you to think back to how you handled this problem, maybe in elementary school. You took a thing that was suspected to be a bar magnet, you put a piece of paper on top, you sprinkled it with iron filings, and you tapped the paper, and you could see the magnetic field. This shows us a typical dipole magnetic field. All magnetic fields, at least all macroscopic magnetic fields, are dipoles. And you can see the field lines and the whole bit. So what you've done is you've used a iron filing to trace an invisible field. And I want you to notice that the iron filings respond to everything that affects the magnetic field. For example, if you had another bar magnet come nearby and move, the iron filings would be reoriented, would respond to that field. So there's a really subtle, important point here that these tracer particles are responding to everything, not just the thing you started with, which was to measure that bar. So everything that affects that field is measured. What would be the tracer particle for invisible social context? Or you would observe people's behaviors. People's behaviors are the tracer particles because, as we just concluded, we behave differently in different social contexts. And very similarly, behaviors respond to everything that affects the social context field. So early on, my people who worked for me who were deep thinkers and happily critical said, Charlie, what about if the team's not technically competent? And my first thought was, well, the teams that I'm working with, these aerospace teams, are typically very, very technically competent. Then I thought about it some more and said, if they're not technically competent, that would suppress their social context just as surely as everything else would. So the behavioral measurements is also affecting everything that affects the social context field, not just the things we think about at first. You with me on this? Another important idea. Deep idea. Okay.
So does that relate to the 7 deadly sins? Is that where that kind of comes into play?
This
Is you've got a poor social context?
Yes, that's something that exactly. If you have a broken social context, okay, then you want to look at what's causing it, and these are not the only causes, but they're common causes, and you can diagnose those and deal with those, and that will now move the social context up. And now, once you're out of that horrible field where everybody's miserable, you can then start working on keeping agreements and expressing appreciation and things like that. You'll never be able to implant these more subtle things if you've got a destroying field in the background wrecking everything. And just to remind you, a few of those are things like the team leader's incompetent. The job cannot possibly be done with the money that's available. It's technically impossible. I had all these cases are real. The organization is not organized to do the work in an effective way. That's less common. But in NASA projects, systems engineering is a big part, as I've talked about from time to time. It's got to be able to do that. So exactly, good catching that. So now we've established that behaviors are the way to measure the social context field, just like iron filings are the way to measure the magnetic field or see it. How do you pick the behaviors? Well, I'd suggest you pick the behaviors that address the deepest needs. That's exactly what we do. That's the logic of this thing. This is a really important set of slides. I hope this is coming home. So to sum it up, a Jungian-inspired quarter system analyzes social context fields into 4 manageable parts. I call them dimensions because quadrants is kind of too stale for me. The 4 dimensions sequentially align well with Maslow's needs hierarchy, setting up the powerful 4D request. Behaviors are tracer particles for social context fields, just like iron filings are tracer particles for magnetic fields. And this enables the most effective tool development ever, and I'll talk more about this. But the instrument that measures these behaviors and charts them as people go through here, and because it's 10 questions, it's very fast. You can do this over and over and over. You harness the power of repetition. And this was maybe the most startling result ever doing this work, was that this thing was increasing performance, behaviors that correlate with high performance so rapidly that I did a calculation for an aerospace team. And I think I did this like once a quarter, and I put in the cost of the labor to fill out the form and process the form, and the attendant improvement you would get, and taking the numbers just literally, it's 4,000% per year. How's your 401k doing? If you want to get pessimistic, you could say I'm wrong. It's only 2,000%, and that's fine. I've got so much room here. And this finding got my small one-person company the PRISM Award for International Coach Federation, which normally goes to people like Ernst & Young or Hewlett Packard, the big HR organizations, for quantitative measurement and enhancement of business results that was so efficient and effective. So maybe take a little moment for thoughts and contemplation or questions? This is arguably one of my favorite parts of the whole thing, this logic.
Yeah, it's to me it's really interesting how you compare the 4D and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like it's right there, but I didn't see it. So thank you.
Yeah. This, the way this happened is one day I started to ask myself, can I unify this with something else? This wasn't here, I don't think even here when I wrote the book, but, and I said, okay, now, what would be another way of thinking about this? And I thought, well, there's Maslow's needs, and began to explore it and said, yes, it makes total sense. I don't actually remember when I did this work with Maslow, but it wasn't there from the get-go. It might have been there by the time of the book. I don't remember. Let's see, the book was written in 2008. So by then I was, I've been doing the work for about 15 years. So yeah, maybe it was there. Wasn't there from the get-go. I want to make sure this logic makes sense to you because this is really important.
Yeah, I don't have anything from my end.
Okay. You want to stop here or plow ahead? You got a choice?
I'm good to keep going.
Okay, Drinka, okay. So this is where I would do a card check with the group. Ask for a card check. Everybody's got the green, yellow, and red cards. And I'd look around for all green cards. So now the context shifting worksheet. I was thinking about Einstein's statement, you cannot solve a problem with the level of thinking that created it. And I'm working with TRW, really smart people. And they're calling me in about once a month for 3 days, 2 or 3 days in Redondo Beach. And they usually oppose a problem that can't be solved, because if it's solvable with ordinary methods, they would do it and not spend the money on me. They'd rather not pay me if they didn't need to, although we enjoyed working together for sure. So put this thing together, which basically is the whole workshop in about 60 to 90 minutes. You start off, this is the hardest part. What is the situation you're in? The reason it's difficult is that the kind of thing this will work with is anything that involves human interactions or relational issues. Make a trivial example, it won't fix bad weather, okay? That kind of thing. But if you look at what's going on in business situations, almost everything involves some human interaction or some perplexing interaction. And we'll talk more about how to write this down. Then next is the outcomes. And what's interesting about this, I call this cast the net broadly. There's almost, when you stop and think about this and write it down, there's almost more depth to this than meets the eye. Then we're going to use the idea of mindsets being emotions and storylines. We're going to record the emotions we're feeling, and most often is some form of angry, or frustrated is a nice word for angry, or scared. Then the thoughts that are powering that emotion. Then we're going to look at what we call green storylines, replacement thoughts, because you can change your thoughts pretty easily with not too much work. That creates then a positive emotions. Now we change the mindset, and this is AMBR writ large is what we're doing here. Then we do the 8 behaviors, sort of in the sequence of the Maslow's needs, and then we end up with action steps. And this seldom fails to produce some interesting, innovative, new way of thinking about things. Many people say, this is the best thing I ever did, is this worksheet. And some people use it just routinely. So I'm using this with, I'm going to show you an example using this with proposal work to use confirmation bias to get, so my approach to working on proposal teams was different than the other consultants. The other consultants are all there to make a better technical story. the best technical story, and I'm there to motivate the customer to pick you because I understand how humans think. We have our own ideas, mindsets coming from our emotions and storylines. And there's objective reality, and the part that we pay attention to is the part that matches our emotions and storylines. And this process is called confirmation bias. So I wanted to make them wanting to pick the proposal. That was what my approach was. And so I started with this, I was working with them on a very difficult proposal for James Webb Space Telescope. And the head of proposal operations, who happened to be a friend of mine, called me up and said, we're getting ready to make our final oral briefing to the customer, and we need your help. And I said, okay. So at the time, he said, well, we only got an hour and we'd be do it by a phone call. Does that work? I said, sure. I said, go give everybody a copy of the context shifting worksheet before we start. So what's your situation? This is a true story. And I only can tell it because it was so long ago that I don't think anyone's got any energy about worrying about this. We're in a tough competition for a $1 billion contract that we must win, and we're losing. By must win, what that means is the management has promised this in their forward guidance in their business plan. So they're on the line telling customers they're going to win this. So as far as they're concerned, you better find a way to do it. And it's important to have a concise, simple statement. Otherwise, if you don't do this work, you're throwing money down the toilet, in my opinion. So we stop and do this with teams at this point. So this is probably a good, we got 4 minutes left, good point to pause, get any final thoughts from you guys. Then we'll proceed into this next Tuesday, and hopefully Larissa's back. In any case, she'll watch the video and keep up with us, as will Nico. I think maybe, I haven't looked lately, maybe 20 or 30 people look at these videos the week or two after I post them.
Yeah, I think so.
So
It's good.
this is the work I actually do. So many years ago, I was doing these workshops. People said to me, I don't have time for a generic workshop. I don't have any time. I want to work on my problem if I'm going to spend 2 days or 3 days out of work. So integrating this into here, Frank did this actually before me. I was toying with it, and he went ahead and did it without even me knowing. So, which is fine. So there we are. So we'll come into this Tuesday with some examples of how you pick a situation that works with this process. Parting thoughts or comments?
Sounds great.
Yep. Thank
Appreciate you
for
taking through this again.
My pleasure. Okay.
always learning through this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.